Yeah, so we're starting a new game. This is Tank War. What we're going to try to do today is get the walls in place, the background in place, get the tanks on the screen, and then see if we can get the tank, or at least one of the tanks, to move. Okay, that's our goal for today. How do we do that? So we need to start with the sprites. Sprites are here. I say create sprite. Now, my interface is a little bit different than yours in that I have an older version, I guess. But we're going to create our walls first. I always like doing walls first. So we're going to say wall 1. We have two types of walls in this game. There's one that can get destroyed by tank fire, another one that can't. So we import, and you want to go out to the S drive. For me, that's a different drive. I think this classes. And then go to game design, and we're in chapter 10. We're skipping a few. Usually we make these two, but we've been going kind of slow, so I want to try this one. The resources are in here, and what we want is the wall. Here's wall 1. I'll change the view here so we can see the icons. So we want that, wall 1. Now that's the wall that can't be destroyed. This one's a little bit more flimsy looking, so that's the one that can be, but that one's the one that can't. So there's our wall. Anything we need to do with this? That's about it. Just has to exist. And then we're going to create wall 2. I'll call this sprite wall 2. And we're going to input that second wall type. And that's the destroyable wall type. So we have our two wall sprites. Other sprites we're going to need, well, for our battle arena, we need a background. So let's create our background. So I'm going to call this one SPR_background. Here's our background, and then we'll import our background. Now the background looks like a dried out lake bed or something like that. It looks pretty cool, actually. What's neat about this background is that the edges all match. So if you tile this background, the edges will actually flow into the next tile. These are really hard to make, by the way. I'm not sure how they do it, but they do it somehow. But it tiles in all directions. Okay, so you can put that on a page, and it's pretty seamless. You can't see the seams between the tiles, which is pretty cool. So that's our background. And then while we're in here making sprites, we'll make the two tank sprites. So just like the walls, there's two types of tanks. There's tank 1 and tank 2. So SPR_tank1. And again, we're just importing our tank. Here's tank 1. Now, you notice here that we've got all these frames. If we play it, does it? Well, I guess we set a speed. You don't have to set a speed. I'm just setting a speed so you can see it. So all the tank does is turn. It's really glitchy. Why is it so glitchy? Okay, so that's not what we want the tank to be doing. The reason why there's all these different frames for this tank is in the old version of GameMaker, they had to, the way you would turn a sprite is you'd have to have all pictures of the sprite at 6-degree intervals. So you take 360 divided by, I don't know, however many frames there are here. That gives you about 6 degrees between each turn. So what we're going to do, GameMaker has this new idea called a image angle. So we don't have to do this anymore. So we really just need the first sprite. So if you select the second sprite and go all the way, hold down Shift and go all the way to the end and hit delete, then you're good. And then we only need one sprite. We don't need 36 sprites. Obviously, we need to edit this because we don't want that green background. So we remove a color. That's here. And now we have a transparent background is what we want. Another thing on well, I guess we'll get to that. So the problem with these two tank sprites is they almost look exactly the same. And so you can really get confused sometimes if you look away and then look back and to say, which one is my tank? I don't know. So on one of these tanks, I want to choose a color that's a little bit more different. So I'm going to choose red here and maybe grab the paint bucket. This didn't work too well last time. I'm going to try it. And I'm just going to dump it in here, just so that we have some difference between the two tanks. And then I'm just going to fill in these pixels. You can choose whatever color you like, but this image here has all been anti-alias, so all the colors are kind of blended together. Okay, so I don't know if, you look up here, I don't know if that's enough. But at least it's something you can look at to see that's a little bit different. You might also take these things and fill them in if you wanted to. Let me try that. I wonder if I can draw a line. Here's a line tool. I could do this. So all I'm trying to do is make these two tank images a little bit different so that we can see them. Yeah, I don't know. This will take a while. But if you could go in and edit these and just try to make one that's markedly different than the other. That's the one problem I've always had with these two sprites, is they're just too similar. What? Question? Okay. So anyway, I would fill that one in as well, but I don't want to waste class time doing that. So so here's our first sprite, our tank sprite, and then here, let's create the second tank, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The tanks are almost the same. We'll say tank 2. And again, we import the tank 2 sprite. And again, really not much different. Do the same thing. Go up here to the frames and select that, and then we're going to delete the rest of them. And then hold down Shift and click the last one, and then say delete. And that pretty much cleans it up. Another thing we have to do is remove that background color. So we have to go edit the image now. And again, we're removing that green color and replace it with the transparent color, so things show through. Okay? All right, so we have our two tank sprites, but in order to put them in the room, we have to make some objects. Let's first make our background. Now remember, in GameMaker, you have two layers to start with. You have your instances layer, that's where your objects go, and then you have your background layer. So we want to go to the background layer. So switch to that, and then choose the background sprite. And there's our background. But notice that we have a couple problems. Our background is not big enough to cover the whole room. We don't really want to stretch it, because that looks all pixelated and icky. What we'd rather do is tile it. But we got to get our room the right size. So our room's going to be square. We're going to say 1,280 for both the width and the height of the room. Our grid size is 32, so we want it's interesting there. I think our grid size is 32. Yeah, 32 by 32. And then what we want to do is tile it both. Let me zoom out so you can see it. So there's the size of our battle arena, relatively large. But we want to tile it horizontally, but also tile it vertically. Okay? And now we have this kind of cracked mud background for the tanks to drive around on. Okay, so that's good. All right, so now we have our background. Remember to switch back to the instances layer because the next thing we're going to put on is the walls. But in order to be able to put the walls in the room, we have to have wall objects. We can't drag sprites into the room. It has to be an object. So I'm right-clicking on object and saying create object. And we'll call this first one object underscore wall 1. And we'll choose our wall 1 sprite. The only thing we really have to do to this wall is we have to say that it's solid. Okay. We want our walls to be solid. They're not moving and they're not. Okay, so that's it on the object wall 1. Let's try object wall 2. This one's just a little bit different. You still choose, choose the wall 2 sprite. It is solid, but we want to make the parent of wall 2 to be wall 1. We just want. So make the parent of wall 2 actually object wall 1. All right? And now we have our walls. So next step, we want to make sure the tanks can't get out of the battle arena. So we need to put a wall all the way around the outside of the arena. And we want to use object wall 1. That's the type that can't be destroyed. Okay. So choose wall 1, just click on it, and then hold down the Alt key, and then you can paint these on. I'm holding down the Alt key and I'm painting it, basically. So holding down Alt and then just dragging, clicking and dragging with the left mouse button. I actually did one perfectly. Wow, I never do that. I'm always sloppy like that. Kind of hard to do. If you do have ones that you don't want, you can hold down the Shift key and select them and delete them as a group. Yeah, question?
I forgot what the tile size was.
32? Yeah, 32. It's the default size, I think. And then finally, the last wall. So I'm holding down Alt again, left clicking and dragging. Just putting in the wall so that our tanks can't get out. Now we're going to have the tanks start out in this one tank will be up in this corner, the other tank will be in this corner. So if you hold down the control key and then scroll with your wheel in the middle of the mouse, then you can zoom in, okay, which is kind of nice. And what we want to do is we want to leave 4 spaces. You got to leave room for the tanks to move. So 4 spaces from the edge and 4 spaces from the bottom. We want to put the little enclosure. So I'm counting, let me just count. 1, 2, 3, 4. So my enclosure, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So I want to put my little enclosure here. So 4 away from there, and then, or the fifth block away from the edge of the room, and the 5th block away. And then make it 4 deep and 4 high. So our tank is going to sit in this little alcove here, sitting right inside there. The reason why we do that is to protect it in case the other tank is close. And then we want to put something just like that on the other corner of the room. So over here. How am I clicking on it and moving it? I'm using the middle mouse wheel and clicking down on it and using that. So I'm using that middle button. And again, I hold down the Alt key and I'm just counting 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And I'm making my little enclosure. It's kind of a 4 by 4 kind of a thing with one side missing. Okay. So our little tank is going to be right there, and you see that our battle arena is kind of bisymmetrical. Okay. Another thing we'd like to test in this first battle arena is the destroyable walls. So I'm counting it. I'm trying to find the middle here. If I count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere here. I'm making that 12 high, but again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just, oops. Okay, so I have this wall here. My hope is that that's in the middle. It doesn't look like it's in the middle, does it? So I'm going to get rid of these. I'm holding down the Shift key, deleting those, and then I'm going to put in. So again, what we're doing is just trying to put it in the middle. Oh, we have to be careful there. You see how I drug it into the other side? That put 2 in the same spot. We got to make sure there's not 2 there. So I better check all of those. See, that one has 2. In the old version of GameMaker, if you put something in a spot, it would overwrite the other one that was there. So I just want to make sure that I don't have 2 in the same spot. So be careful there. Okay. So there's my one wall, and then I'll put that same wall. I think it's 12 high. That's how many I'm doing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's so we can test these destroyable walls when we get to it. So we have that kind of set up. All right, so that's what we're shooting for. I'll wait here for a second while you get that done. I'll pause. All right, so here we're back looking at adding the tanks now. We don't have tank objects yet, so we have to make those. So let's make our tank objects. Object, create object, and this is object tank 1. Well, before we make object tank 1, we're going to actually make object tank parent. We're actually going to use parent power in this game, something called inheritance. So parents, it doesn't get a sprite because you shouldn't be able to make this parent. This is just a place where we're going to put things that both tanks need to have. That's not unique to either tank. And that's pretty much it. Just has to exist. So we create that. We call it object tank parent. And then we can create our other tanks, and those will be children of this one. So now we can say object underscore tank 1. We'll use our tank 1 sprite that we made. And then the most important thing here is to set the parent to our object tank parent. So things that are unique to tank 1 we'll put here, but things that are the same for both the tank 1 and 2 we'll put in tank parent. Okay, so that's tank 1. And then finally tank 2. We'll do the same thing. Object tank 2. We get the second tank. And we'll set the parent here to object tank parent. Okay. Now that we have objects over here on the right, we can put them in our room now. So the spawning point for both tanks is going to be these little enclosures. We're going to put tank 1 up here and tank 2 down here. So here, object tank 1, I'll grab it. I'm just going to put it right there. And then object tank 2, I'm going to put right here. All right. We do have a problem, though, right? If you look at tank 1, see how it's facing the wrong way? So with object tank 1, we have to do something unique to it, and we have to turn it around. And we can do that programmatically right at the start of the game or right when it gets created. So just for tank 1, we need to do this. If you go to tank 1, so double click on tank 1, object tank 1, and we're going to add a create event. So when this tank is first created, what should it do? And this is where we're going to turn it around. So first we set the direction. So direction is what we're looking for. And I would just use this one, set direction fixed. And we're going to have it point the other way. Now that's the direction the tank will travel if we try to move it. It still doesn't change the sprite though. So if we say image, no, it's not image. We type in angle. That's the one we want. Set instance rotation. So instance again means object. So this is an object. So we're going to set the rotation because we're pointing to the left. Remember, the angle 0 is pointing straight to the right, and it grows positive counterclockwise. So straight up would be 90, but pointed the other way would be 270. Okay? So make sure to say 270. And what this does is it actually rotates not only the direction, but also rotates the instance itself, so it's pointing in the right direction. So let's play the game and see if that's what happens. And what we'll notice is we have a problem. See, this got turned okay. Well, 270 is the wrong number. It's supposed to be 180. It got turned okay, but look, it's like not in the box anymore. And our problem is our center of turning is not the middle of the tank. It's the top left corner. So see how it turned around that top left corner, and now it's out of place? Okay, so we have to do a couple things. First, we have to fix this. This is supposed to be 180. Let's try that, and you can see the problem a little bit more readily here. So I've turned the tank around 180, but the center of turning is actually the top left corner. Now the tank is all messed up. So what that tells me is that my origin point in my tank sprite is not correct. It should be in the middle, and it's not right now. So I'm going to go in here and see how it's the top left corner. You want to change this to middle center. Okay. Same thing for tank 2. We need to change the origin point to middle center. However, when we do that, then when we go and look at our room, we'll see that they're kind of off. They're not in the right place. So we have to realign them into the box. So grab them like that and move them into the box. Okay, so we're looking at, we've got the tanks now in the right place. Hopefully when we rotate them, like this one gets rotated right at the beginning. You see it's pointing in the right direction, so let me zoom in. Yeah, it's pointing the right direction, okay? So now both tanks have an equal starting position. All right, so how do we make these tanks move? I'm going to actually, to illustrate this a little bit better, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tank and I'm going to move it out so we can drive it around. So now we're going to try to get the tank to move, okay? So I'm going to start with tank 2. Now tank 2, the controls for tank 2 are going to be the arrow keys. The controls for tank 1 is going to be the WASD keys. So there'll be 2 people using the same keyboard to play this game. Okay? So now what? Well, how do we make it move? Well, we have to do a couple things. The first thing we have to do is go into Object Tank Parent, and we have to add some friction to it. So when we're not pressing the button to go forward, it slides to a stop. Now, this is the first time we've used friction. And so friction is actually helps us control the tanks a little bit better. Might be a little bit frustrating at first, but it is actually a good idea. So in the parent tank's create event, so add a create event to the tank parent. Okay, tank parent, add a create event. And here we want to just set the friction. That's this one. And we want to set that to 0.5. Okay. So that'll allow both tanks to kind of slide to a stop. Okay. Okay, so we have friction set. They're both children of parent tanks, so they both get that friction. Now let's get tank 2 to move. Now our keyboard is going to be kind of different. We haven't really driven around a vehicle before in game design yet. So what do we have to think about? Well, our accelerator is the up arrow. Our down arrow is going to make us go backwards. And it's going to be our right and left buttons that are going to turn the tank. We can actually be going forwards and turning at the same time. So let's add the forward one. And we want to use a key down event because we want it to repeat. Okay. So key down, and we want to use the up key to be our accelerator. Okay, so make a key down up event. That sounds kind of funny. And then here we want to set the speed. So we say speed. It's not the animation speed, but it is this speed to set the speed. Whatever direction we're going, we're going to add 1 to the speed. We'll say relative. Okay, that'll add 1. Okay, so I'm going to try this and see if I can make it go. You'll see that there's a couple problems. So I just zoom right off the screen. Okay? If you didn't see that, I'll do it again for you so you can see it. Here's the tank. And it goes way too fast and then off the screen. Okay? So clearly our tank is not moving like a tank. It's moving more like a dragster. So we do need to limit the speed a bit. So we're going to use something that we haven't talked about before, and that's something called well, in most languages they call it a constant. This is a value that does not change. That's why they call it a constant. But in GameMaker they call it a macro for some reason. So we need to create a macro. But the problem is, when do we create the macro? And the answer is, we create the macro in the controller. Well, we don't have a controller yet. Remember, a controller is an object that doesn't have a sprite, so we don't need a sprite for it. But it kind of controls things in the room. And so we're going to actually create a controller right now, just so that we can set the speed properly. So right-click on objects, say create object. And we're going to call this one, just like in our other games, we call this obj_controller. So now we have this controller. In the create event for the controller, so let's add a create event to our controller. When it gets created, we want to create this macro. So if I type in constant Or if I type in macro, it'll bring up this one, macro. What's cool about macros is you give them a name, but typically when you make constants in any computer language, or most computer languages, you do it in all caps. So we're going to call this one max tank speed. Okay? Max tank speed. And we're going to set it to 8. That's as fast as we want our tank to go. Okay? Now we can go back to our tank 2. We were adding 1 to the speed, but we want to only add 1 to the speed if it's less than the max tank speed. So let's say if here, if and drag it here above. And our variable is speed. And we want to say if the speed is less than 8, then you can add 1 to the speed. So drag this over to the right so it's controlled by this if statement. So if speed is less than 8, that means they have, you don't say 8 though, you would say max tank speed. By making a macro, instead of having a magic number like 8, what does that mean? You can actually see what it means. This is the max the max tank speed. Okay, so now we have this max tank speed. Let's see if this works. If I run it now, it saves it, and then off I go. Let's see if it limits my speed. Here I go. Yeah, that's good. But again, I'm driving straight through the walls. That's not so good. So let's define a collision event with the wall for the tank parent, because we want both tanks to behave the same way. So we go to the parent tank, and we say, okay, I'm going to add a collision event with wall 1, because I know wall 2 is a child of wall 1, so I'll only have to make a collision event with wall 1, and that will take care of wall 2 as well. What do we want it to do? This one's weird. This is what we do. We set the speed to negative speed. So whatever speed we go into the wall with, it's going to change our direction and make us bounce off the wall, basically. We don't want to say relative here, though. Okay. So now when I play the game, so I'm driving into the wall. It's a collision event with wall 1. It should bounce off the wall, kind of. So here I go, crash into the wall, and it kind of bounces. Okay. I can't go backwards, nor can I turn at this point. But you can see it kind of bouncing there. So the tanks themselves, when they collide with things, are kind of bouncy. All right, so that's our speed, and that'll work for both tanks because we put this in the tank parent. What else do we need to do? Well, now we need to be able to go backwards. So let's go back to tank 2. So let's add a key down event. So key down, down event. Key down, down. It's a little redundant. Key down, down. And we want to do just the opposite of what we did in the up event. We want to set the speed to, well, we want to go backwards, so we'd say -1. And we say relative. But again, this too has that same problem with there's no speed limit. So forward I have a speed limit, but backward perhaps I don't. So here I go forward, there's a speed limit. Backward, whoa, whoa, boing, boing, boing. So you can see that I need some kind of limit on the back side, right? It kind of looks cool though. So again, we have to ask an if statement first. And again, our variable is speed. Now the speed will be negative if we're going backwards. So we would say if the speed is greater, I guess, then negative, that's a negative sign, max tank speed. Okay? If the speed is greater than negative max tank speed, which is 8 at this point, so if it's negative 7 or negative 6 or negative 5, any of those, then it will subtract one more off it, make it go a little faster backwards. So drag this off to the right of the if statement, so make sure it's controlled by the if statement. And now we have control of our tank speed going forward and backwards. So here we go. We hit the wall, going backwards. Wonk, wonk, wonk. Okay. However, this game would be really boring if we could only do this, going forward and backwards. I can't turn it, right? But I can go forward and backwards. So how do we turn it? This is where it gets a little interesting. I guess it would be, if we go to tank 2 again, and we're going to add a key down left. Key down left. Question? Yeah, sorry. So we're going to the left. What should we do? Well, we want to change the direction a little bit. So this time, don't choose this one, but this one, set direction variable. And what we want to do, since we're going left, is we want to add to, we'll add to the direction angle. So we'll say 6. And we'll say relative, because we want to add 6 degrees to it each time the keyboard repeats. But this is kind of funny, actually. If you try this out, it's kind of mind-bending. It doesn't quite work. Because here I am, I'm driving, and then I turn left and see. What's the problem here? Does anybody know? Yeah, the direction is changing, but the picture is not aligned with the direction we want to go. Very strange driving around like that. Okay, so what we have to do is we've got to get the tank to the image angle to match the direction angle, right? So where do we do that? Well, both tanks will need to be able to have to do that. So let's go to the tank parent again. And here I think what we need to do is add a step event. So a step event. Remember, this is the event that gets fired every frame. And so we'll reorient the picture of the tank every frame. So what we do here is we say, well, let's type in angle again. You know, that image angle thing. Set instance rotation. So here what we're going to do is we're going to set the angle to, well, the direction we're going. So we'll just say direction. Don't say relative here. That would be a mess. So now we'll get the object to point in the direction it's traveling. At least that's the hope. Let's see if that works. So now, see how the tank is rotating. And it is traveling in directions it's pointing. Now it feels a lot better. I can't turn right yet, but 2 wrongs don't make a right, but 3 wrongs will get you back on the freeway, right? That's what my dad says. Okay? So I can turn left, but again, first of all, it's turning too quickly, I think. Right? So let's go back to tank 2. Here's the left key. And I said, what did I say? I said add 6 to it. But I'd rather use a constant. Again, that's another magic number. Magic number is just a number that appears magically in your code and you have no idea what it's for. Here, we're going to call it, let's call it this in caps. We say rotation, and then we'll call it angle. How much do we want to add every key press to the rotation? So this is the angle we want to do. And we want to say relative. But the problem is we don't have this constant yet. We haven't made it yet. So if we go to our controller then, that's where we're making our macros, I guess. So we go to the controller. What do we do in that create event? See how we're creating this macro max tank speed? Well, it has a little plus sign off to the left of it. And if you click on that, you can say, okay, we can say rotation. There's rotation angle. And we had 6, but 6 was turning too quickly. So we're going to set it to 3. But again, by using these constants, you can dial it in just to see. Yeah, question? Yeah, sure. I can come over. All right, so we're going to change that rotation angle to 3. But the other thing I want to change is the tank is moving too fast. Tanks move generally pretty slowly, although newer tanks can go about 50 miles an hour or so. But even over rough terrain. So here, I want to change this to 4. By changing it here to 4, that's going to affect all the tanks, both forward and backwards. And I only have to make this change once. You can dial in whatever you like. So you can play around with different numbers here. Go into this create event for the controller, and you can try out different numbers to see how that affects gameplay. So let's try it now and see. Okay, so here I am, a lot slower, but now it feels like a tank. Ooh, I can turn left, but I can't turn right yet. See, that feels like a tank to me, okay? So the rotation is a little bit slower, and the speed of the tank maxes out at 4, which feels to me more like a tank. But, you know, it's up to you. You're the game maker. If you think that speed is too slow or that rotation angle increment is too small, you can change it. I tend to like things slow, but I'm old, so maybe that's why. Okay, but that feels more like a tank to me, okay? But you can play around with these numbers. It's easy to change, right? If you want, well, I don't know, let's say 16. Ooh, that'd be great. And then say rotation angle, I don't know, 20. You know, you can change these here and do silly stuff to see how that affects the movement of the tank. So here's my tank. This will be weird. Whoa! Whoa! So by changing a couple numbers, look at that. That's weird. You can make your tank do funny stuff. Okay. Very strange. Okay. So, but I wouldn't recommend those numbers. Obviously, I kind of like it slow. So I'd say 4. For me, I'm going to go with 4 and 3. Okay. Okay. So try that out. Or do what you like. Any of those numbers work. I still need to put in the right key. I'd like to be able to drive it, so I'm still missing the right key. Now here in the left key, if we look at left, you can see that all I'm doing is adding the rotation angle to the direction. But what do we want to do otherwise? Well, here we want to add, we could duplicate this event. I wonder if you say copy event. And then, can we paste it? Yeah, we paste it. And we want to do a key down right this time. But the only difference then is instead of adding to the rotation or adding to the angle of the direction, we subtract from it. So we put a minus sign there. And then finally, we have a tank we can drive. I go forward, I can turn left, I can turn right, I can go backwards, I can do all this. Boink. Okay, so what is your job then today for the rest of the period? Well, your job is to get the other tank to move, okay? And what you'll note is that it's all the same. The only thing that's different is what keys you use, right? Here's tank 2. We're using left, up, right, and down. For tank 1, you're going to use, so left will be A, up will be W, or accelerate. Backwards will be the S key, and right will be the D key. Okay? Everything else is the same. These are all inherited from the parents, these grayed out ones. So the only thing different are these keyboard things. But all the code in it would be exactly the same, I think. Yeah, there's no difference, really. Okay? So duplicate those same events with the same behavior in the in tank 1, and then you have the ability to have 2 tanks going at the same time. Any questions there on the tanks? All right, so you know what you need to do. You need to add the other tank now, tank 1. And again, use those constants. That way you can mess with the numbers and dial it in exactly how you want it. If you use the macros, I guess. All right, that's all I had. All right, one thing I forgot to mention in our room, we forgot to put the controller in the room. So I don't know if your constants will work or not. So it's important to drag the controller and put it somewhere in the room. I'm just going to put it somewhere where I can see it. So I put it right there. Make sure you do that. It seemed to work for me. It didn't matter if I put it in the room or not because it was just macros. But just to make sure, I would put the controller in the room. Because with some other students, we were getting some weird behavior there. So don't forget to do that. All right.